Hello and welcome to this video. In this video I will guide you on how to use Docker with Eclipse Vertx applications. So if you're not familiar with Docker yet, what you could do, you could go to the website docker.com and check their documentation, or you could also check one of my videos on this channel about Docker or cloud tools in general. That would be available a bit later on after this video. I'm currently working on the series of videos about Docker, Kubernetes, etc. So without further ado, what I'd like to mention here is that I will not talk about Docker as a standalone tool in this video. Rather, I will show you how to combine it with Vertx in order to enable containerized deployment. So in order to do this, what I'd like to do, I would like to go to vertx.io and to create a brand new project. So we will not do any Vertx coding in this video, and it is enough to use just a starter bare-bone project. So let's go to the app generator and let's quickly customize what we have here. So let's provide a group ID. The artifact ID would be Vertx Docker. We will not add any dependencies in this video, so feel free to skip it, this dependency section. What I like to do, I just like to add some advanced options like a package name. So Vertx Docker ends. Let's select JDK 17 and let's generate a project. So now we have this Vertx Docker zip file, and let's unzip it to the folder. So let's copy everything and put it in the working folder. So now let's go to the ID of your choice and let's import this project there. So let's give to Maven some time to resolve dependencies, and while it is done, what I'd like to talk briefly about is that immediately after we have created this project, we could deploy it in a form of fat jar application. So fat jar, or it's also called a uber jar, this is a jar file that contains all dependencies bundled in it. So it is very useful when you have this project created on your machine, built on your machine, and you could run it on other machines that does not have all these dependencies that we have in the class path here. So it's very convenient and it makes things portable. And in order to do this, and this is the reason why I use this this Vertx starter, because it's already have a Maven plugin to build fat jar applications. So in order to do this, let's open a terminal and let's run a command called mvn package. So what this command will do, it will build a fat jar file that could be used as a normal Java program that could be run with a normal Java command line tool. So let's give some time to get a target folder. So inside the target folder we have a lot of stuff, and so what we are interested about is this particular file, which is Vertx Docker fat jar. So we need this one particular file. So as we run this file, we would run our application. So let's go to the source main package. Inside the main vertical, we have here a small boilerplate code that just run as a simple HTTP server on a port 8888, and that is basically all logic that we expect to have. So what I'd like to do now, I just like to run this application as a Java program. So use a Java jar. That means that we execute a jar file, and then we provide a path for this file. So it's a target folder, because we are in the root directory, in the Vertx Docker directory, and since Vertx Docker 1.0 snapshot fat.jar, and this is what we want to have. So now, as you see, we're running this application as a fat jar, and now it immediately could be deployed either on your local machine or some VPS, or as a system process, for instance, or it could be also deployed on various platforms as a services that support deployment of Fedjar applications such as Heroku, Clever Cloud, Azure, Amazon, etc. But again, the problem with this approach is that we need to have this Java command. So we need to have a Java installed on our machine, which will not always be a case. A better approach is to use Docker in order to prepare containers that we could deploy on our servers. Okay, now we could use this fedjar and we could run it inside the Docker container. So the reason we use this Docker container is that we allow the standardized deployment. So as I have said previously in the previous subsection, we need to have a Java installed on our machine, which will not be a case, for instance, on your server. So in this way you use a Docker container that will contain Java, so GDK, and it will be executed with this GDK. So without further ado, let's start with the Docker, and the first step, of course, is to install the Docker. So I hope that you have installed it, because installation for different systems is a bit different, and of course I could not figure out everything in one small video. So rather I hope that you have checked the docker.com documentation and you have installed the Docker. So the first step is to create a Docker file. So inside the root folder of our project, let's create a new file and call it a Dockerfile. So a Dockerfile is a convention. So it's just a file without any extension. And it is important to mention here that likewise, the pom.xml file does not contain all jars, but just a definition. The same way, the Docker file is not a container itself. It's just the definition of containers that will be used by, technically not a container, I use a container here, but I would say it's technically correct to say a definition of image, but in most cases we really interchange these terms, but of course technically it's a definition of image. But in our case it's the same thing because we have a small project and we do things like that. So the first thing first is to provide a from directive, and as an object-oriented programmer you can think this, again it's not 100% technically correct to say that the from is like extension of like a parent image, but the idea is the same basically. By using from directive, we take an existing image that is available in Docker Hub for us publicly, and we extend it in order to customize it for our use case. So in this case, we use an open GDK image, and we specify its version. The versions that we will use will be 17 slim. So feel free to use the latest version, but 17 is LTE right now, and actually we have Java 17 for our application, so it's no need to use the later version here. The next thing that we need to do, we need to provide an expose directive. So the expose directive allows us to specify a port that would be listened by this container. So in our case it will be 888 because we have already this port inside our main vertical, and let's keep things as it is. The next thing is to provide a volume. The volume directive is basically like a working directory for this project, for this image. So I will put it in app, so just name it like that. The next thing is very important, and it is called add. And in the add, what we actually do, we take everything that we have already created here. So we have this Vertx Docker file, fedjar file, and we put it inside our container. And it is very important to say that we need to have this fedjar available for us before we will use Docker. And this is what continuous integration, continuous deployment tools actually do for us. They build a project, they create a fedjar, and then they use this Docker file definition. Because Docker does not build anything, it does not have Maven, you know. We need to have this already. Just to mention that it's not some kind of magic that happens here. No, we have this particular file and we will use it inside the Docker container. So what we say here, we say target Vertx Docker, and this the same, as I said, the same files that we use here, vert.jar. And the next thing, we could just rename it to the app jar in order to make things a bit more nice, because you know, to have all this name, it's a bit vague. The next thing is to use a command directive. So there is also an entry point, and this is a tricky thing to distinguish between command and entry points. And for this, I highly suggest you to check one of my new videos about Docker on my channel, because here we will use a command, which is a bit different from entry point, but they like in most cases they could be used interchangeably, but they're not the same. So and for understanding the difference, I highly suggest you to subscribe for my channel and to check this new stuff. So here we provide an array. So the first command will be Java. So we run this GTK. The next would be a jar argument, and finally would be a file name, which would be app.jar. So this particular file, and this basically all what we need to do. Let's save it and let's open a terminal. And the next thing we need to use a Docker command line tool. So we use Docker build, and we specify a name by using a tag argument. We specify a name for this image. Let's call it Vertx Docker. And finally, we provide a location of the Docker file, of this Docker file. And because we are inside the root directory, we just put it's like that. So let's execute this command, and that allows the Docker to build our container. So it will take some time, especially if you don't have OpenJDK image already on your machine, like I don't have it. And I need to download it. So as I said, it's just could take some time. Okay, we're back now, and it took for me 37.5 seconds in order to build this image and in order to download an OpenJDK dependency. So now we could run this image as a container using Docker on our local machine. So let's go to our terminal back, and let's execute the Docker run command, and by using P or port arguments, we specify an internal and external port. So we do port mapping. So in other words, what we will do here, we will specify the external and internal port. So the external port is a port that is accessed by your browser, HTTP client, etc. And the internal port is the port that is specified inside the expose directive. And the next thing is to provide a name of the image. In our case, we specify it as a Vertx Docker using the tag argument. So say Vertx Docker, and now let's run this this image. So now, as you see, we have the same output because we have the same jar that is running now inside the Docker container. So in order to check that everything is running, let's go back to the Firefox, and let's go to the local host 888, and now as you see we have the same output, the same results that we had previously. So now let's just exit this command. What I like to mention here is, of course, this is a standardized approach to deploy applications today. However, there are some complications, especially if you need to bundle your application with external dependencies, such as servers, databases, etc. For this, you need to use a Docker Compose, and this is out of the scope of this video. And I highly recommend you to check my book, Principles of Vertx 2nd edition, or one of my courses, or my videos on this channel about cloud technologies, where I also cover these topics. So in this video, I have just demonstrated you just a basic approach of using like a plain Docker deployment.